In the early 2nd century AD, the city of Rome was a sprawling metropolis, and likely the largest city in the world at the time. Historians estimate over 1 million people lived in Rome by the 2nd century. Of these, a significant fraction were enslaved people, perhaps on the order of one-third of the population. The remainder were free residents, which in Rome during this time mostly meant Roman citizens. Thus, hundreds of thousands of citizens called Rome home in 100 AD. The question is, how many of those citizens were actually working for a living? To modern eyes, we might assume most able-bodied urban dwellers would be employed. However, ancient Rome's economy and society were very different from ours. A large class of the population, the enslaved laborers previously mentioned, performed the bulk of manual work, and even many skilled jobs. Meanwhile, many free citizens survived without steady jobs, supported by slave labor, public welfare, and the vast wealth of the empire. The result was that a surprisingly large percentage of Roman citizens did not work in the sense of holding a regular occupation. Contemporary writers and modern historians alike have noted that Rome became a city of parasitic consumers living off the spoils of empire. To analyze this, we need to look at who among Rome's citizens did work, what jobs were available, and how others managed to get by without work. One major reason for low employment among Roman citizens was the institution of slavery. Enslaved people in Rome held jobs across the board. They weren't only domestic servants or gladiators or laborers, they also served as teachers, scribes, physicians, artisans, and more. Further, virtually any menial labor or basic service could be done by a slave. Wealthy households had slaves for cooking, cleaning, and tutoring children. Even many professions that would be well paid today, like teachers and doctors, were often occupied by highly educated Greek slaves in Roman times. This meant fewer openings for free citizens to find work. In addition, a large segment of working Romans were freedmen, former slaves who had been freed by their masters and who became citizens upon gaining freedom. Freedmen often remained in the city and put their skills to use in trades and businesses. In fact, evidence from tomb inscriptions indicates that the working economy of Rome was dominated by people of servile origin. Over 60% of inscriptions that mention an occupation in the city were commissioned by freedmen or even slaves, proudly recording their trades and achievements. These freedmen worked as bakers, carpenters, fishmongers, shopkeepers, leather workers. Basically, they formed the backbone of Rome's artisan and retail class. Further, even though they were now technically free, they still had obligations towards their former owners, who were then called their patrons. A poor freeborn citizen would find himself competing with skilled ex-slaves for jobs in every craft and service sector. For the lowest class free citizens, opportunities to earn a wage were limited. Some picked up work as casual laborers, for example, hauling goods at the docks or construction sites when large building projects were underway. Many lingered each day in hopes of being hired for short-term tasks. These day laborers lived a very precarious existence. Ancient sources and modern analyses describe a large class of underemployed poor in Rome. People with no steady income who survived on odd jobs and state charity. Even those who had a trade often earned very little as they had to compete against highly skilled laborers who were doing it for free. If so many Roman citizens had trouble finding gainful work, how did they survive? The Roman answer was the famous policy of bread and circuses. The emperors provided a grain dole, a form of public welfare, to feed the city's population, coupled with plentiful entertainment to keep people happy. By around 100 AD, about 200,000 adult male citizens in Rome were receiving free grain every month. This state-sponsored grain distribution essentially fed the poor of the capital. To put that number in perspective, 200,000 men would represent roughly 20% of Rome's total inhabitants in this period. Given that those 200,000 were generally heads of households, the grain dole supported a much larger portion of the citizen population, including their wives and children. Notably, the vast majority of citizen families needed the dole to survive. The bread was accompanied by the circuses, so to speak, and the entertainment was plentiful and free. The emperors and magistrates put on hundreds of holidays and festivals throughout the year, staging gladiator games, chariot races, theatrical shows, and more. During Emperor Claudius's reign from 41 to 54 AD, there were well over 150 days per year, classified as official holidays, when no public business was conducted. Rome's leaders were quite aware that keeping the urban populace fed and entertained was a key to maintaining order. Modern scholars interpret this as the Roman state essentially buying urban peace by subsidizing the citizens' livelihood. The grain dole and extravagant games pacified the unemployed masses, a sort of social contract where the people gave up political power in exchange for being taken care of. It was, arguably, history's first big welfare program, and it recognized that hundreds of thousands of Romans had no prospect of meaningful employment. By providing the essentials, the empire made it viable for so many citizens to remain idle, and to prevent discontent, they provided entertainment. It's important to note that even for those citizens who did have jobs, the workday was relatively short, and the tempo of work was relaxed by modern comparison. Most Romans who worked had a 6-hour workday, roughly from dawn until noon. After midday, business generally closed, and people spent the afternoons at leisure, attending baths, watching games, or resting. There was no concept of a busy 9-to-5 grind, and the culture of Rome valued leisure time. Of course, it's necessary to remember that this laid-back lifestyle was supported heavily by enslaved people performing most vital tasks in society. These slaves had horrible lives, and were often worked to death in the mines or on giant farming estates. Essentially, free Roman citizens could afford to work less because enslaved workers and provincial resources propped up their urban comforts. Taking all this into account, what percentage of Rome's citizens were actually working around 100 AD? While exact figures are impossible as the Romans didn't keep labor statistics, historians have made educated estimates. Modern economic studies describe mass unemployment and underemployment in Imperial Rome as a unique phenomenon. Scholars estimate that only between 20 and 30% of adult Roman male citizens worked in what we would describe as a regular employment capacity. Including those who worked irregularly or at their leisure, this number may have been as high as 40%. Notably, even lower-class women with Roman citizenship didn't work unless it was to assist in a small family business. To put it simply, a huge percentage of Roman citizens in Rome didn't work for a living. As economic historians have noted, it wouldn't be until the 20th century that such large, totally unproductive adult male populations would be seen again. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Ivar the Boneless. The name alone is enough to spark curiosity and questions about how a fearsome Viking warlord could earn such an unusual name. Even today, over 1,000 years later, this nickname is still debated by historians and enthusiasts alike. For the Vikings, nicknames often held symbolic meanings, and Ivar's stands out as one of the most peculiar. Ivar the Boneless was a Viking leader active in the mid-9th century, known for leading invasions in England and Ireland. Norse sagas claim he was the son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, and that his brothers included famed warriors like Björn Ironside and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Historically, Ivar emerged in the 860s as a commander of the Great Heathen Army. The chronicles portray Ivar as a clever and ruthless strategist, a man who often outwitted his foes, despite any physical limitations his nickname implied. In 865, Ivar led a massive coalition of Norse warriors that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle dubbed the Great Heathen Army. After landing in East Anglia, this army swept into Northumbria, capturing the city of York in 866. In 867, King Aelle of Northumbria, the monarch who, according to legend, had slain Ragnar, was defeated and slain by Ivar's forces. With Northumbria subjugated, Ivar installed a puppet ruler and turned his attention south, continuing his assault on the Anglo-Saxon petty kingdoms. Having wreaked havoc across several kingdoms, Ivar eventually left England, and by 870 or so he appears in Irish records, and he's recorded as dying in Dublin around 873. By 871 he was even being called the King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain in some accounts, a testament to the breadth of his power. Ivar's campaigns left a large part of eastern England under Norse control, an area later known as the Danelaw, securing his fame as one of the most formidable Viking conquerors of his time. Why exactly was Ivar called the Boneless? The truth is murky. Notably, contemporary accounts from Ivar's lifetime don't use this nickname. It's absent in the records of his English and Irish foes. The moniker surfaces only in later Norse sagas and legends, suggesting it developed as storytellers embellished Ivar's tale. Over the years, several theories have emerged to explain this mysterious name. One explanation comes from the old sagas, and involves what some sources call a curse, and what others call a prophecy. According to the tale of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar's mother warned Ragnar that if they conceived a child immediately after his return from war, the baby would be under a curse. Ragnar ignored her advice in his eagerness, and as a result, their son was born with malformed bones. One account claims that in place of bones, he had only cartilage in his body, rendering his legs practically useless. Thus, from infancy, he had to be carried everywhere, and he earned the nickname Boneless to mark his condition. Yet the sagas also make clear that Ivar was extremely intelligent and charismatic, the wisest of Ragnar's sons, turning his supposed handicap into a strength. Since he had little ability to focus on single combat, he instead had the opportunity to turn himself to studying tactics and strategy, becoming a dangerous asset to the Norsemen. He was even carried into battle on a shield, directing his troops to victory despite being unable to walk on his own. Another theory is that his nickname might stem from a real medical condition. Some historians have speculated that Ivar suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, commonly known as brittle bone disease, which would have made his limbs extremely fragile. If true, boneless would be a fairly literal description of his ailment. However, the same sources curiously note that Ivar was also tall and strong in stature, which seems contradictory if he truly had a debilitating bone disorder. This inconsistency suggests we should be cautious, and the nickname might have been exaggerated or symbolic, even if it had some basis in Ivar's health. A different interpretation is that boneless wasn't meant as an insult or diagnosis, but as a metaphor for extraordinary flexibility or agility. In Old Norse, his name can mean legless as well as boneless, which might imply he moved in an uncanny way. Viking culture often used animal comparisons for warriors, and Ivar's own brother Sigurd was nicknamed Snake in the Eye, so serpent imagery was clearly in the family. It's possible that Ivar earned the epithet by moving with snake-like speed or flow. Such a nickname could have been a tribute to his speed and dexterity in combat. In this view, rather than highlighting a weakness, Boneless might have highlighted a unique strength. An intriguing scholarly theory suggests the nickname might be the result of a medieval copyist's error or misinterpretation. In Latin, the word exosus means hated or detestable. Some historians propose that he had a Latin nickname with that meaning, essentially Ivar, the really bad guy who nobody likes, which a scribe with shaky Latin misunderstood. If the scribe misread exosus as exos, without bone, they could have erroneously translated it into Old Norse. In this scenario, a clerical mistake in a manuscript could have transformed a completely different epithet into the puzzling boneless. While there's no definitive proof for this theory, it's a reminder of how easily meanings could get twisted in the age of hand-copied texts. Going against the theory is the fact that none of the Anglo-Saxon writings refer to him as the hated or the detestable. However, this could just be survivorship bias at play, since we only have a very small amount of all the works which were ever produced in that time period. A final theory posits that Boneless was based on his inability to perform his masculine duties, so to speak. Some later sagas hint that Ivar showed no interest in women, or that he had no lust in him, which can be interpreted as an inability to procreate. In this crude figurative sense, calling him the Boneless might have been a crude joke. If this originated as gossip among his contemporaries or enemies, it could have stuck as a not-so-flattering nickname. Another variant on this theory is that Boneless did refer to a lack of ability to perform with the ladies, but that the nickname itself was ironic. In this sense, it would be like nicknaming a muscular guy Tiny or a tall guy Shorty. It would have been a joke that was understood to those under his command. They would have known that Ivar was the original Viking from Hell, and that's Hell with one L in this context. They would have known Ivar is edgy, in your face, and a Viking who gets busy consistently and thoroughly. Under this theory, Ivar was proactive with the ladies, so to speak, a fact that was lost on chroniclers recording the unusual nickname. Ultimately, we can't be sure why Ivar acquired the nickname the Boneless. No single explanation can be confirmed, and unless some specific manuscript is found, it's unlikely this will ever happen. That said, this very ambiguity has only made his legend more compelling, inviting speculation and debate through the ages. It's allowed later writers to portray him as a great tactician who commanded respect from his Viking troops with his sharp mind rather than through force. One thing is certain: more than a millennium later, people remain captivated by Ivar and his bizarre and unique moniker. One of the world's most illustrious gemstones vanished without a trace in the aftermath of the tumultuous events of the early 20th century. The Florentine diamond, a magnificent yellow diamond once prized by European royalty, enjoyed centuries of prestige before its mysterious disappearance. Its saga spans opulent Renaissance courts and the fall of empires, culminating in a baffling mystery that has intrigued historians for over 100 years. In 1918, amid the chaos of a collapsing empire, this priceless gem simply vanished, and to this day, no one knows for certain what became of it. The Florentine diamond was an extraordinary stone by any measure. It weighed approximately 137 carats and was cut with 126 facets in an intricate double rose style, giving it a light yellow sparkle with a slight greenish tint. The early history of this jewel is deeply wrapped up in contradictory legends, but all versions of events end up with an extremely wealthy and powerful Italian family acquiring it. One story claims it belonged to Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and that he carried it with him into battle. Unfortunately for Charles, he fell at the Battle of Nancy in 1477, and according to the legend, a peasant scavenged the gem and sold it for virtually nothing. From there, the diamond found its way into the hands of the Fugger banking family, after which they're speculated to have gifted the diamond to the Medici family. Another tale suggests that the diamond arrived in Europe much later. In this version of events, a Portuguese colonial governor obtained a large yellow diamond from a local ruler in the 16th century and later sold it to the Medici family of Florence. Whatever its true origin, by the mid-17th century, the Florentine diamond was confirmed to be in Tuscany under the Medici. In 1657, a French jeweler wrote about seeing the impressive gem among the possessions of Grand Duke Ferdinando de' Medici. According to this French artisan, the Grand Duke's father, Cosimo II, had the diamond expertly cut and polished. After the Medici line died out in 1737, the Florentine diamond passed to the new rulers of Florence and then into the House of Habsburg. Francis of Lorraine, who became Holy Roman Emperor Francis I, had married Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, linking the Tuscan treasure to the Austrian imperial family. The gem was brought to Vienna and became one of the highlights of the Habsburg crown jewels on display at the Hofburg Palace. A contemporary report in 1848 described the Florentine diamond as the most splendid of the imperial gems and valued it at £100,000 at the time, an astronomical sum. The final known chapter of the Florentine diamond's known history began with the fall of the Habsburg monarchy. In late 1918, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, Emperor Charles I fled into exile. The imperial family secretly took many crown jewels with them to Switzerland, including the famous Florentine diamond, hoping to keep these treasures safe. Then, at some point during this exile, the Florentine diamond vanished. The mysterious disappearance of the Florentine diamond has given rise to several theories about its fate. One prominent theory is that the exiled Habsburg family covertly sold the diamond to raise funds during their relatively impoverished years abroad. And relative poverty really is the key term here, since they still lived in extreme opulence even during these times. But considering the Habsburg Emperor Charles V was the person who was first described as possessing an empire on which the sun never sets, it was quite the reduction in wealth. Given the stone's notoriety, proponents of this idea suggest it may have been cut into smaller gems first, so that the pieces could be sold discreetly without drawing attention. An alternative theory blames theft. Perhaps an opportunistic servant or associate stole the Florentine during the chaos of exile and fled with it overseas. Rumors indeed emerged that a supposedly loyal servant of the Habsburgs absconded with the giant yellow diamond and eventually sold it in South America. Some have even speculated that the jewel might have been lost in transit or used as a bribe during the family's escape, but such claims remain unverified. Notably, while the Habsburgs were in exile, both the Austrian and Italian governments claimed that they were the rightful owners of the diamond. The Austrian government claimed that the contents of the royal treasury were that of the Austrian state, and that the Habsburgs didn't have the right to take it. The Italians, for their part, argued that it should be returned to them on the basis that the Medicis once owned it. This Italian claim is a little bit unusual, given that the diamond was inherited by the Habsburgs after generations of intermarriage with the Medici family. However, all that is to say that the Habsburgs, at the low point of their power and influence, had two states which claimed their diamond. As such, and given that they weren't in the best financial state, it seems most likely that they either sold it or used it as collateral for a very large loan. That said, the idea that they entrusted one of their longtime servants with this task, and the servant simply ran off with it, is also possible. Over a century has now passed since the Florentine diamond was last seen, and its fate remains an unsolved mystery. Today, a replica of the diamond is available for viewing in the Palazzo Medici Museum in Florence.